Good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Lorraine Lee. I'm the faculty member here at Gateway Community College. And to start off, our dean, our academic dean is going to welcome you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Kosinski, Academic Dean. I just want to say, first, the president normally is available for these very, very important events. So she does send her regrets tonight, and I get to stand in just briefly for her. And I wanted to say to everyone how thrilled we are to have you here tonight. I want to thank especially Paul Solomon and, of course, our guest, David Brooks, tonight, who I think is going to give us a terrific, terrific talk. There's an old statement that a journalist once made when I was in college, something like, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I think that might capture our main speaker tonight, but we'll wait and see. Glad you're here.
Well, thank you very much. This is our third year of Yale Gateway. This is the first one of the semester, so we welcome you. We're so proud to be hosting this conversation with David Brooks and Paul Solomon. So just for a little layout of what's happening tonight, for the first half of this event, Professors Brooks and Solomon will be discussing Gateway to What, followed by a question and answer portion of our program. We ask you hold all your questions until the end and use the microphone. Since we're taping, we need you to speak clearly into the microphone. For a little background on our series, several years ago, I had the opportunity to hear Paul Solomon speak at a conference. He explained economics in such clear terms that it came alive, and he's won Emmys, Peabody Awards, and Loeb Awards for his work. Professor Solomon could foresee the increasing role and importance of community colleges in preparing students to succeed in today's world and today's job market. As testament to his commitment to economics, to bring economics to everyone, Professor Solomon has been teaching macroeconomics here at Gateway, a great class. So now, Professor Solomon's brainchild, Yale Gateway, has become a regular series here at Gateway. Not only do our students benefit from this partnership, but we believe the broader New Haven community benefits from these extraordinary speakers. Today, we're very honored that he has brought his colleague, David Brooks. Professor Brooks is a best-selling author, columnist for the New York Times, commentator for NPR and PBS, and a friend to the community colleges. Perhaps some of you may remember that Professor Brooks was one of the first to spotlight the importance of community colleges in 2009 with his column, No Size Fits All. At the time, Professor Brooks wrote that community college students are, and I quote, tackling some of the country's biggest problems. He further observed, and I again quote, people who work at community colleges deserve all the love we can give them since they get so little prestige day to day. So for my students, there's going to be a quiz on that. All right. He understands the many complicated reasons students attend community colleges and the obstacles they face to complete their studies, including because bad things happened at home. Last year, in response to President Obama's proposal to provide free community college education, Professor Brooks suggested that the government instead strengthen structures around the schools, which we really need in this day and age. And that was in his compelling piece, Support Our Students. So I know this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So without any further ado, I give you Yale University's Brady Johnson Distinguished Practitioners of Brand Strategies, David Brooks and Paul Solomon.
So the only reason I teach at Gateway is because of Lorraine, with whom I co-teach, and she does all the grading and she does all the organizing. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I just get up there and talk for a while. And David and I have been colleagues in two places for years now. The last 5 years is how long you've been at Yale, right? And I've been at the NewsHour, PBS NewsHour, for 31 years, and you've been there for how long?
Reverse the numbers, 13.
There you go. There's a certain symmetry. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to ask David questions, and then you're going to ask him questions. And I may actually turn it over to you guys sooner rather than later. Those of you who've been to previous iterations of this event know that I can go on for a while just asking questions because that's what I do for a living, and I'm a really inquisitive guy. And there are all kinds of things that we don't see each other that often, so there are all kinds of things I'd like to ask him. But I think with as many people as are here tonight, that it would be probably a good idea if we got you in earlier rather than later. So, but we build this as gateway to what? Or I build it as gateway to what? Meaning, what is the future for people who come to institutions like this? Is this the answer to the changing nature of the American job market? And really take it any which way you want. Gateway to what?
Yeah. Well, my hero is a guy named Alexander Hamilton, who, as some of you know, is a Latino hip hop star from the Heights. No, he grew up in the Caribbean. His dad split when he was young. His mom died in bed next to him when he was 12. He was adopted by an uncle who committed suicide. He was then adopted by his grandparents who died within a year. So by age 14, he'd lost everything and everything he ever knew. And he came to this country, and by 25, he was General Washington's chief of staff and a war hero. By 35, he was a lawyer and had helped write the Federalist Papers. By 45, he'd retired as a Treasury Secretary, as the most successful Treasury Secretary in U.S. history. And so his is a story of awesome upward mobility. And he created a system of politics and a system of government which was designed to give government the limited but energetic means to help poor boys and girls like him succeed. And that tradition lasted, if you remember, in the 19th century, the Whig Party was existing, which was how Abraham Lincoln got his start, then the early Republican Party, and then to Theodore Roosevelt. And it sort of died out. And so how many Hamiltonians are there? There's like 6 of us left. But the whole idea is that America exists to give poor boys and girls a chance to rise and succeed, to get up the ladders. And so we do some things really badly about that, but we do some things pretty well. We had the Land Grant College Act, and the thing we do best right now is community colleges. And so it is the single best engine of social mobility in this country. And so it gives people the chance to be on the second and third and fourth rung. And we all know people in our own lives, and well, life is complicated, so she's my ex-wife, but my wife went through community college. And it first of all gives you the skills. That's the obvious part. I mean, if you look at the economic data, which Paul reports on, the education premium, the price that goes with getting a degree is just rising and rising. But to me, it gives 2 other things I'd want to emphasize. The first is the discipline to complete any degree is just so hard, and having the internal self-confidence and the internal spirit to do something really hard amidst obstacle, amidst commuting, against hassling paperwork, against pain-in-the-ass teachers, and get through it is that's like a spiritual skill. And then the final thing about what it does is it puts you in touch with people unlike yourself with whom you have to cooperate. And I think we overemphasize the hard skills and when we think about, but when I hire somebody, I want them to know, I want them, A, to be a good person. I have a friend who hires a lot of people, and he asks the following question, which is, tell me a time you told the truth and it hurt you. He wants to know their character's worth working with. They want to work with that person. So I tell my Yale kids if they can fake that one, they're fine. No. And so one of the things I do think that happens here, and not only from the really hard skill courses, but piano, the soft skill courses, just becoming a better person. And we have a tendency in this country to emphasize professional development. But if you keep your spiritual development going, you'll be fine. Because everybody wants to work with a decent human being. And so I think community colleges work on both those sides.
Is the phenomenon of technology replacing jobs making it ever tougher to climb. I don't know how many rungs your ladder has. The third or fourth rung is where you had community college students. So how many rungs are there?
There are 6 rungs. I'm just making this up on the fly. I don't know how many
That's
rungs.
okay. Well, you started. So
Yeah.
you started it.
Yeah.
I expect there are more rungs than that.
Donald Trump's on a higher rung. About
He's,
to fall off the ladder, though.
yeah, he's on a different ladder, but I think we're going to get to him. But the question, it's a question that when you're teaching community students, community college students, you're asking yourself. I'm asking myself, which is um, how much good am I doing? How much good are Lorraine and I doing, or any of the people who are here who teach at the community college, in terms of giving those kids a chance, or people, it's not all kids, God knows, a chance to actually climb as opposed to not fall back even further.
Yeah. First, I read a stat. This is only tangentially related to your question, but a lot of people, when they think of college student, they think of a person who went to high school, took a summer off, and then began college as a freshman. So what percentage of all Americans taking college courses fit into that pattern? The answer is 5%. So most people are late in life. They're doing some online something or other. They're in the Army. They might be in prison. So when you think, oh, the online education or the non-traditional student revolution may be about to come, it's already happened. We're in that. So that's the first thing to be said. The second thing to be said, I was in Memphis a couple days ago, and I was driving by, if you know, in Memphis they have the FedEx sort. It's where all of FedEx planes come together, and it's a big transportation area. And so when you're driving through Memphis, it's not unlike driving through here. There are like 10 trucks for every car. There are just a lot of trucks. And I'm thinking, I've been reading about the driverless cars, and I've been thinking those guys are in trouble. And because they're going to have, they already have some driverless taxis in Pittsburgh, and that the driving part of life is about to come to an end. So the crucial question to ask is, am I doing something a machine could someday do? And if you're in that business, if you're a fungible person doing something a machine could someday do, then you got to wonder, you got to get out of that business. But am I doing something, a human-to-human relationship, that a machine will never be able to do? And that's why I emphasize the emotional stuff so much, because emotion is something machines won't do, and building relationships and being in some sort of service, human to human, non-predictable, where you got to adapt to another human being. That a machine will never be able to do. And those jobs they're going to be here and grow, because one of the things we like to buy when we have more money or as we get more affluent society is to build relationships. We like to buy experiences, whether it's hospitality or food or whatever else. And so it's just, am I doing something that's fungible, replaceable by a machine, or am I doing something where I have to rely on my full human self?
Well, poor Lorraine and I are teaching macroeconomics. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure how much I'm developing or helping develop the spiritual character of our students. I mean, so should we be having group therapy sessions with them instead? I mean,
my course is called Therapy with Brooks, so that's well, the other thing to be said, and this is about teaching, is if you remember, I'll go back to our high school teachers who we remember. I usually find when somebody made it from, especially from some disadvantages in life, there's always one person in their life. It could be a grandparent, it could be a parent, it could be a teacher, a guidance counselor. There's always one person. And what did they actually teach? They didn't say, oh, I'm going to teach you how to become this trade. They just filled you with love. And you built that emotional security and that care and then you could go in a million different directions as long as you had the capacity to have some emotional security in life. And so just 2 quick examples. When you're 18 months old, they have a thing called a strange situation test. And they take kids who are 18 months, usually with their moms. They take them to a room, and mom comes into the room with a kid. A stranger comes into the room. Mom leaves the room, and then mom comes back into the room. And they look at the kid, how they react to those transition moments. And about 50% of the kids are what they call securely attached. And they've got normal relationships attachment models with mom. They know how to be loved. They know how to communicate with mom. And those kids at 18 months do pretty well in life. You can predict by looking at a kid at 18 months with 80% accuracy whether they're going to graduate from high school. 20% of the kids have what they call avoidant attachment systems, which is they've been sending signals to mom, but nothing's been coming back. And so I had a teacher describe to me a kid who had an avoidant attachment pattern, which was, and the kid tacked into the schoolroom like a sailboat going in the wind, wanting to get close to teacher, but not knowing quite how to do it. And then a lot of kids have disorganized attachments. They have had no consistency at home, and so everything's sort of a chaos, and those kids struggle. Now, nothing is determined at 18 months, but how you relate to other people, whether you know how to build an attachment to a teacher or to a boss or to colleagues, that is just a super important skill. One other illustration that just comes straight to my mind. So in World War II, they drafted a bunch of guys into the Army. And some of the guys rose and become majors, some stayed privates. So they wanted to know what trait correlated with the guys who rose to become majors that had very successful careers during World War II. Was it IQ? No correlation. Was it social status at home? No correlation. Was it physical bravery? They're in war? No correlation. The number one correlation was relationship with mother. That the guys who had somebody pouring a bunch of love into them, they knew how to pour it to their men. And so what I would say for you is that and this is, I'm thinking of an email a guy sent me, a veterinarian in Oregon. He sent me an email and it said, what a wise person says is the least of that which they give. What gets remembered is the smallest of their behaviors and the totality of their actions. Never forget the message is the person. So what a wise man says is the least of what they give, the message is the person. So when your students you're in Lorraine's macroeconomics, they may remember some macroeconomics, but they'll probably remember your enthusiasm about life and your passion toward truth and your inquisitiveness. And if that leaves off, then they become lifelong learners and you've taught them a lot, even if they can't remember who John Maynard Keynes is.
Adam Smith. I'm wearing my Adam Smith tie at the moment. Well, that's nice to hear, but is it going to, in an economy where skills are increasingly prized, rungs on your ladder there, is our love for them or our inquisitiveness going to close the gap? Because if you ask me, and we've talked about this before, what the biggest problem is, the economic problem in the United States, not at this very moment, given the campaign, but just in longer term terms, it's inequality and growing and increasing inequality. It's wealth and income inequality it's been 35 years now, at least. And what I wonder about, and I wonder particularly if you tell me that at 18 months there's a certain fated quality to this, how you dealt with your mother or not, whether Lorraine and I or any of us here are fighting, again, the same question really, a losing game or a game where we're just trying to keep our students in the game as opposed to falling off the ladder entirely.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that it's not fated. Some people have bigger disadvantages than others. Some people are born on third base, and others both financially and emotionally. But you have one mentor, or people do it on their own. And so things happen early in life that have a big influence, but nothing is fated. All I know is I agree with you about the widening inequality, but all I know is that I run into people every day who defy the most amazing odds. And if you graduate if you get an AA here, the data is, let alone if you get a BA somewhere.
Which just to note, in our class there are 25 students, I think it's 25, and when we polled them, every one of them was spending 2 years here because it was cheaper, and then wanting to go on to a four-year
Yeah.
degree.
So-
25 out of 25.
So you tell me the national unemployment rate is probably 5 or around,
5, yeah.
but the unemployment rate for people with a college degree, I'm guessing, is 2.
Yeah, something like that, 2 something.
So if you can get a college degree and have a 98% chance of being employed, that's pretty good. So to me, it works. And getting people to that college degree is a much more complicated thing than we think we knew, but it starts here.
How do you optimize the likelihood that people will be here and will go on to a college degree? Because the number is that it's about a third now of the current cohort, people who are in college, will get a four-year college degree within their lifetimes, I think, is the number at the moment. But that means 2/3 won't.
Right.
2/3 will not.
Yeah. But some people don't need a 4-year degree. They've learned a skill and they can go become chefs, or they can have very good careers. The thing I think, at least in policy world, we underemphasize. We for a long time we thought if we give people access to education, that's enough. But now we've got to get them through education. And to me, what we underemphasize is the just the weird stuff that happens in life. So a lot of people don't complete because they're academically unprepared and they need coaching. So that's something I think we know how to do. But a lot of people don't complete because we were talking at dinner, because their car broke down, because somebody got sick at home they need to take care of. I was with
Because
a
they can't have child care for their kids. That
Yeah.
came up in our class and Lorraine
Yeah.
and my class today when we were discussing this very
Yeah.
issue.
I was with a woman in Providence, Rhode Island, a couple years ago now, and she works to try to get people through school. And she says she told me a story of somebody, the registrar lost their files.
Mhm.
So you're like a affluent kid, you drive to school, you know who to ask, you get the files. But she described one kid, it was like 3 bus rides to get to school, didn't quite know who to ask, and decided, I'm just lost here, I'm out of here. And so she dropped out because the registrar lost her files. And so, but it's all sorts of miscellaneous little stuff where people need the help. That's why in that piece, like getting wraparound services, getting childcare, getting tuition, getting textbook costs, getting an emergency electrical bill pay, as we were talking about here, that stuff tends to be undervalued.
Well, how do you mobilize America to do that when there seems to be such a widespread political disinclination to make that kind of, to use economic terminology, investment in people?
I think we still invest in education. People believe in investing in somebody who's willing to work for it. And if they can see an institution where people are willing to work for it, I do a community college commencement every year, and they're the best things I do, because when I'm at a commencement, I look at the shoes of the women, because everyone's wearing gowns and you can't see anything else, but people wear really fancy shoes, because that's the only thing they can really show, so they show some really fancy shoes. And so I was at a place called Harper College, which is a community college outside of Chicago, and all the women, like some of them were in their 50s, some were in their 60s, some in their 30s, some in their 20s, and a lot of them, their first generation to graduate from any sort of college, and they had like crowds of 30s with air horns blowing when they walk across the stage. But they all had awesome shoes, because this was like a great event, and they had a little flair themselves, and like it's like just so much personality. I have no idea what that had to do with your question, but
I was wondering the same thing. I thought the shoes thing was very cool, but I couldn't figure out where you were going with that. But look, my question is a kind of is born of a certain despair. I mean, not despair about our students, but the fact that 2/3 of Americans aren't even there. Now, sure, some are going to be mechanics and chefs and do things that don't require a four-year degree, but if you need either that specific skill or a four-year degree to be in the game, and there does not seem to be the political will to do the major kind of investment that you're talking about, right? I mean, the 24-hour and call them in the morning and get them up, if they don't show up for school. And I mean, the kind of stuff that I've reported on a lot, then where are we and where are we going?
Yeah, there is though. I mean, I mean, there's potentially the will, and that's for us to create. I wouldn't despair. I mean, the pupil spending in this country is higher than anywhere else in the world. We don't always spend it particularly well, but the money is there, and we could probably spend it a little more in certain areas, and we could make it a little more equal. God knows. But I do think people still see this as an American opportunity society. That if we don't have opportunity and we don't have mobility, we're not different than any other country.
Well, let's then pivot to what I think most people here are probably most interested in at the moment anyway, which is to say the current political climate, which is what you cover and write about and talk about and all the rest. Do you see us moving in the direction of, well, I don't know, there are a couple of things implicit in what you said, more investment or more efficient investment or smarter investment, which is another way of saying efficient? Where are we going at the moment in
Yeah.
your
Well,
view?
this election campaign has been terrifically depressing for me. So in the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, I wrote 9 million columns, all with the one theme: "Don't worry, Donald Trump will not get the Republican nomination for president."
Right.
And so then I've spent the last
Hey, wait, I want to ask a question. How many people here thought, what year are you, 2015, when in
up
2015?
until March of 2016, probably.
All right, so let's just say the end of the year. How many people here, honestly now, thought that Donald Trump had a genuine chance of being the Republican candidate as of, say, January 1st?
I should have called you, man.
And how many people thought he did not? Well, so you're among friends.
Yeah. So I've spent the last 7 months pretty much on the road all full time, trying to figure out why I got it wrong.
And what's the answer?
Well, there's of course a lot of answers, but you
Yeah.
know, first of all, I should say, apropos of this community, that it was not a depressing trip. I found so many places I would go, where wherever you would go, there were people trying to heal communities, and people have heard me say this in this room, but I was in Houston, and they had a no after school program. A young woman from New England goes down and creates an after school program with 1,400 kids all of a sudden. Then I was in Navajo Reservation, New Mexico, and a couple comes down from Minnesota, and they created a drug treatment program for 60-year-old Navajo guys who were just coming out of prison. And the day I visited them, they had $17 in their bank account. And those people are everywhere. They're just everywhere. And yet, nonetheless, there's a lot of people falling between the cracks. There's opiate addiction wherever you go. There's a lot of people who feel betrayed, like there used to be this social contract in society where I give to somebody and they give to me. I give to my family, they give to me. I give to my workplace, they give to me. And a lot of people feel that that contract has been destroyed, that I give and I give, and they take and they take. And then there are just a lot of people who feel that their life story is just a bad narrative. I was talking over dinner about a guy in Kentucky who had his best job when he was 35, working on a plant that made propellers for air conditioning units that sit atop buildings. And every job he had after 35 was worse than the one before. And his kids were in really just drifting. And then there used to be a code of dignity where you would say, hey, I'm not the richest guy in the world, I'm not famous, but people can count on me. I show up to my neighborhood, I show up to my family, I do what I'm supposed to do. And there's a certain dignity in that. And a lot of people think, and I think that code, that dignity is gone. And those people feel invisible. And if you're not super rich or super famous, somehow you're invisible. And so there's a lot of moral injury associated with that. And so the people I speak to, and I've been, believe me, everywhere from Idaho, I was in Mississippi last week, Texas, they know Donald Trump is a certain sort of guy, but he's their shot at change. And they're willing to blow up the system any way they can. And so, my answer, I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but my answer is he's the wrong answer to the right problem. And so there's a lot that he's taught us about our country.
You did not know?
Well, I sort of knew. Obviously, I knew there was a social chasm.
A growing social
this
chasm.
growing social chasm.
Do you agree with me? It's a growing economic chasm that then has this crucial status component to it.
Yeah, yeah. But I didn't know it would come out in this form. And frankly, I didn't know. In my view, that our whole political debate has changed. That for 100 years, we had a left-right debate, big government, small government. And now we do not have that debate anymore. We have an open-closed debate. We have one group of people who feel the winds of the meritocracy, the information age, and the global economy pushing at their backs, and they feel like things are blowing in my direction, and they want more open trade, more open immigration.
And that's you and me, right?
Yeah, right. And then there are some people who feel all those winds.
By the way, from different sides of
Right.
politically, completely different. You've always been identified, or at least publicly,
Yeah.
as a Republican, and I certainly not.
Really, I didn't know that.
I don't know how to put that emphatically enough.
I thought you were a Jesse Helms type.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like here to symbolize that,
Yeah,
I was in
but-
West Virginia. I ran into a woman, and she's celebrating, or not celebrating, the wrong word. She's going to the memorial service of her mom, who died at 93, and she said, "It's a good thing I'm Catholic, because the priest does all the speaking, and I wouldn't want anybody in my family to have to do the pressure of a eulogy, because we're not word people." And so, like you and I, we're word people.
Mhm.
And we happen to have been born with a skill that's super valuable.
Yep.
But she was not a word person, and so she's born with a set of skills which are probably great skills. They just don't happen to be super valuable right now in this economy. And so that phrase stuck in my head, we're not word people. And so those people, it's all blasting in their faces. And so they want closed trade, closed borders, closed immigration, traditional social mores, and they just want protection. And so when Donald Trump says, "I'm going to close everything up, build a wall," that feels secure to me.
But it's
And they're yearning, let's face it, for the demographic part of America that happened in 1950. They're yearning for a white America that's never coming back.
But the first part of it is it's crazy, right? That is, we're going to be protected.
Well, it's easy for us to say. No, I agree with that. I believe in open trade. I believe in open.
No,
immigration.
I just mean that as a practical
Right.
reality, it's not going to work. That is, the winds that are pushing you, me, and many other people in this room forward or up, or whatever direction you want to say, the right direction, are not going to change. The winds aren't going to the direction of the wind isn't going to change because he builds a wall or doesn't build the wall, tries to build the wall that he claims he's going to try to build, right?
But listen, I'm for as open immigration as it's possible to be, so I'm just arguing their point of view.
I understand. Please.
But a lot of them have personal experience. I had this company, but then it got undercut by another company that had a lot of immigrants, so I got screwed.
I have a guy, I put him on the Newshour. I went to lunch, and my job went to China.
Yeah. So they feel that, and they don't quite know the remedy, but Trump seems to at least understand the problem.
Is that but what did you say before?
Yeah. So
Did everybody hear that? She said that it's because they didn't go to community college or any college. That's the only possible reason they could support Donald Trump.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say to that is, while the weird thing about this election is that it used to be college-educated voters pretty much split along party lines, and now college-educated voters go way disproportionately for Clinton, and non-college way disproportionately for Trump. He had one rally where he said, "I love the poorly educated," but the other thing to be said about his voters, at least in the primary, and we don't know what they are like in the general, the average income of his voters in the primary was $74,000 a year. So that's not poor.
In fairness, it's a number with all kinds of qualifications that ought to be attached to it, because this was Nate Silver's. Isn't that the number you're talking about?
I've seen it a bunch of places, but why do you say that?
I just think it's one of those things that it was from exit polling, and the sample is questionable. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying we want to be careful.
But it squares with my experience that the big Trump people are more richer people in poorer places. And their basic attitude was, I went to school. I didn't really want to become accountant. I wasn't thrilled, but I did it. I took out a mortgage. It wasn't the best house ever, but I did it. And I played by the rules. And then all these other people are coming along, and they're taking out a mortgage they can't afford, and I have to end up subsidizing them, and that's unfair. And so that there's a lot of that. The people who basically played by the rules and did fine, did well enough economically, and then suddenly comes along and they think they're subsidizing people who are not working the way they worked and putting in the sacrifices they've put in. So it squares with my lived reality that it would be sort of upper middle class Trump voters.
But the question is, are they just being willfully ignorant or not willfully ignorant, just plain ignorant with regard to imagining that they'll be, I loved your gesture, that they'll be protected.
Yeah.
These aren't quite the same people, but that that protection is available and that there's a set of policies that Donald Trump, under any conceivable reality, would implement that would protect them.
Yeah, well,
I mean, I'm
yeah,
asking
right,
you
right.
to
It's
make the
general
case.
some people are super cynical about him, but we just got to blow up the system. The biggest blow up as possible. Something better was got to come. Second, and I used to.
By the way, you should know that I was in England in the spring when Brexit happened, and the argument that was constantly used against Brexit by intelligent people whom I would interview, at Oxford University, was, well, surely no one would want to court the unknown by simply voting for something, the consequences of which are unknowable and possibly unimaginable. And yet that's exactly what
Yeah, if your life and your family life is on a downward slope, that's not an irrational thing to do. So you take your shot.
But on a downward slope, I mean, Americans are richer. Certainly, the ones who are making $74,000 a year. I mean, they're richer than any people in the history of the world, except maybe Liechtenstein or something. I mean,
Yeah.
What?
I don't know. I was with a guy in Idaho like 3 weeks ago, and he was convinced Trump was going to win because everybody he knew was voting for Trump. He didn't know anybody, and I was like saying, "Have you read the polls? Like, doesn't look like he's going to win." He's like, "No, that's bullshit. Everybody's voting for Trump," and I could not get him off that position. So that guy, he was a white guy, probably 67, a few teeth, but not a full complement, and had grown up on a farm and had moved off the farm, and he was just taking odd jobs. Once again, I've forgotten the question. And what do I find a lot? I find this a lot. The panic.
Are
really
they
about their
crazy?
kids.
Are they ignorant and
Yeah.
crazy? Is the question.
And so but the second thing to be said, which was what I can say before you rudely cut me off, was I used to cover the Middle East, and the Middle East is just rife with conspiracy theories. Nothing ever happens by accident. And this reminds me so much of that. Like, we went to Iraq to democratize the Middle East, but we ended up Middle Easternizing our democracy. Like, there's just conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. And some of this is social media, but some of it, I just read a study today. If you socially exclude people, if we're in a group of 6 and 2 people get socially excluded, then conspiracy theory is naturally what their mind goes to about why some bad thing has happened to them. And it can seem crazy that, the Mossad blew up the Twin Towers, but for some reason the mind in a state of panic goes to conspiracy theories. And I just hear so many now, Trevor.
So it's exclusion that's the key, not that they're not less wealthy than they were if they're making $74,000 a year. And as my question had been, they're richer. We are richer as a country, and those people themselves are richer than anybody in the history of the world, with the exception of, my joke was Liechtenstein. But
Well, I would say it's partly social exclusion, and partly just a sense that the people who have been running society have been oppressing me, and so screw them. And I don't know if anybody saw Saturday Night Live last week. I only saw 2 clips, but they had Black Jeopardy.
Yes.
I recommend looking at that script. It's a very astute comment on people from left and right having the same general sense this whole thing is rigged. And you find that in a lot of different varieties in the country these days.
Let's start taking questions from the audience because I'm sure there are plenty. So come right up, and you have to come to the mic. Lorraine, do they need to look that way, or are we in the? So it would be nice if what you do is face the camera, which is back there, while you address the question to David over here. It's a little curious, but yeah, that's it. But that way we see you as, or the camera sees you as opposed to the back. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. That's right. We'll hear you for sure, and then you'll be talking to the audience.
I'll be
anyway.
turning this way.
Then I can turn like this. Yeah, my question has to do with the election and specifically with third parties and the fact that there's so much dissatisfaction. And you mentioned it with Donald Trump, but one reason he's still kicking is, to me, is not simply because everybody wants to see things blown up, but they don't like Hillary. And including many people who are voting for Hillary, but they still don't like her, and they don't like the two choices that we have, and they don't like the system, and they don't like the fact that that they get together and they talk and they say, how on earth could this happen that we end up in America with these two people? So my question is, after this election cycle, will we be headed towards a third party, do you think, that is not just a niche party, it's not just the Green Party, but it is a kind of a mainstream party? I listened to POTUS, and there's a group that comes on, No Labels Party. Maybe you're aware of them. But they're more of a mainstream party, and they have certain goals that they want to achieve rather than left, right, but let's get everybody a good job and so forth and so on, a number of them. So anyhow, I'd like it if one of you or both of you would, David in particular, of course, would speak to that and what the possibilities you think are of that happening.
Yeah. So traditionally I've thought there's very small possibility of that because there's just structural barriers to having a third party. Just to get elected, you got to have we have a first past the post system. And we just have structural barriers to third parties. I think it's much more likely now than before, because everyone's trying to game out assuming Trump loses, what happens to the Republican Party. My guess is it becomes the party of high school educated white men. And that's just not a majority party. If the future of America was 67-year-old white guys in Florida, then that'd be awesome. But that's not the future of America. And so that's a recipe for being a 30% party. And yet I don't see how the Republican Party moves off that group, that base of people. And so I think if the Republican Party becomes a 30% party, I think there's a lot of room for some other party that could peel off somewhat used to be moderate Democrats, and frankly would peel off the business community. I've spent some time also around corporate leaders, and what strikes me this year is they talk like Democrats. Like for them, they're working some corporate headquarters. They're in New York, they're in Charlotte, they're in LA, San Francisco, Chicago. They're in pretty socially liberal areas. And for them, say the $15 minimum wage is not a big deal. But you close off my trade, that's a big deal to me. And so they're very disaffected with Trump, and they're all going to not vote or vote for Clinton. But I'm not sure they're permanent Democrats. And so I do think there's room for some third party. There's this group, No Labels, and the problem with No Labels is you can't build a political movement if their first word is no. You can't just be against things. You have to be for something. And I don't think they've quite figured out what substantively they're for or who they represent. But I personally, and this is me coming back to me, I think traditionally we have a liberal movement that believes in using government to enhance equality, a conservative movement that believes in limiting government to enhance freedom, but there's always been that Hamilton movement that believes in limited but energetic government to enhance social mobility. And that movement doesn't exist right now, but it goes deep in American history, and I think it could be revived.
Can I ask him a question? Has Hillary Clinton gotten a bum rap because the organized right, and particularly the far right, Rush Limbaugh and Michael Savage and those kind of people on radio, have been villainizing or demonizing her husband, Obama, and now her. This is only fairly recent, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't hear stuff about this when she was the Secretary of State. I mean, all the vilification. Uh, have has that unfairly uh, characterized her such that people would get up here and say, "Well, people hate them both."
Well, it is objectively true. If you ask people who is honest and trustworthy, 60% think Trump is not honest and trustworthy, but 58% think Clinton is not honest and trustworthy. And that's not just because Michael Savage said so. That's because people have taken a look at her and have formed certain conclusions. And
Are they legitimate conclusions?
I
That's what
have
I
no,
was
I'm
asking.
not a big Clinton hater. I thought she was a mediocre Secretary of State, but actually quite a good senator. But there are two things to be said about her. Um, One, I think she lacks a core animating vision for why she actually wants to be president and has never been able to articulate that. And that comes out in the WikiLeaks that her campaign staff is saying, what exactly is at the core of our campaign here? And it's not actually clear. The second thing, I talked about building relationships for good reason, but for a long time she's just been someone who built walls instead of relationships. And at times it's hurt her. Um, in the Bill Clinton administration, they had this Whitewater scandal, and she was going to. They wanted to get everything out in the open, just not do what they did in Watergate, just get it out. And Bill Clinton thought they should do that, and a lot of people on staff thought they should do that. And she said, "No, we're going to clamp down, and we'll just ride this thing out." And because of that, they had a special prosecutor named Ken Starr, and because of Ken Starr, we got the Lewinsky scandal. And then that led to like 6 years of mess just because of the desire to close things in. And so I think that her tendency to just keep a closed circle of trust and not really be just open and transparent, which explains the email server and all that stuff, is a legitimate critique against her.
I heard you say in class once at Yale that this was a class on Machiavelli, that politics, that the message of Machiavelli was that politics is getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, well, I think Machiavelli was an idealistic guy who wanted to he had a vision for a united Italy. And he was willing to do morally problematic things to get to that ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a real passionate ideal.
I see.
He gets a bad rap. And so, in politics, people, you have to, I really celebrate people who go into politics. I think they do more good for the country than almost anybody else when they do it well. I have a friend who helped create a program called PEPFAR, which fought HIV in Africa. I don't know how many lives he helped save, but like 12 to 15 million. That's like real good. And if you don't care about politics, it's because you happen to live in a society with a pretty good political system. Because if you live in a society where you can be shot in the back of the head or you have to bribe everybody, you don't have the luxury of not caring about politics. And the people I know who are in government, so they just find. I have a friend. She's in the Obama administration. She says every single day sucks, but the whole experience is tremendously rewarding. And that's often like that. Like politics it's the messy business of doing compromises and sucking up to donors and stuff like that.
And having two positions, a public position and a
Yeah,
private position.
sometimes. And so I don't fault people for getting their hands dirty and making compromises, but I want them to have an animating ideal toward which they're always fighting. And I want them to increase. Like we're just living in an incredibly untrustworthy country. If you ask people, do you trust your neighbors most of the time? A generation ago, 60% say, yeah, I trust people around me. Now it's 32%. And among millennials, it's 19%. And if you ask people, do you trust government to do the right thing most of the time? Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was 70%, and now it's 23%. So we can't do anything if we don't trust each other. And I actually think this would be my critique of her. Sometimes with her closeness, she increases distrust she decreases distrust No. Increases distrust,
Right.
and instead of whatever the opposite of that is.
I'm going to ask him one more question, but wouldn't she agree with everything you said about community colleges, about increasing inequality, about, wouldn't she say if she were sitting here, that is my animating vision?
Yeah, well, on human capital policies, I agree with a lot of what she stands for. Increasing community. I would do it a little differently, but details. But if you want to start with somebody when they're born, doing nurse-family partnerships, early childhood education, I would do more charter schools and wraparound services, but Boys and Girls Club, Harlem Children's Zone, community colleges, job training. I do all that stuff. And on that, I'm more or less on her page.
And that isn't an animating vision?
Okay, fair enough. I can admit when I'm.
Please.
Okay. I thought Bush and Rubio would be the last two standing. So
You and me both,
that's
brother.
pretty odd. So I head up a workforce board for this region and do training and retraining with a lot of people in the community college.